this next conversation is going to be about security transformation, bridging physical access and digital identity. The three gentlemen that you see here, plus the other one that'll come late. We all could boo him when he gets here for being late. Actually, we should all clap when he does that on the way up here. I would appreciate that. So they're all here within here he is. See? There you go. Hey, thank you, Ivan. Way to make a show. What a diva. Everybody here is within the pods here, and Ivan's right across on that end. So if you want to get a hold of each of them as we go through here, we're not going to do introductions because it takes up like the entire time if we did that. So we'll jump right into it. We will open it up to Q&A, so I've got a couple questions here for them, but then usually after the second one, we'll open it up. If you have any questions, please let us know, and we'll dive into any of it. So one of the trends that we talk a lot about is the movement of access control systems from being about the door to now being about the person and the identity. So the shift from keeping bad people out to letting the right people in. The other thing is this convergence that's happening in the IT side around identity from a digital side, and then the physical side as well coming together. So that's the premise of this conversation, and it's how do we bridge between those, because in my opinion, and I think I know all of you enough to know that there's an inevitable side of this that's happening. It's happening heavily in the enterprise software world already into our industry, which I know all of you play a part into. It's starting to be more of a conversation here, so let's get into the conversations, all right? So first question, as organizations move toward unified identity ecosystems, what governance frameworks have proven most effective at resolving the traditional conflicts between IT departments, managing digital identities, and the security teams overseeing physical access control systems? So what are some best practices that are working between two different stakeholders that now have to learn to love each other? Who wants to go first? You got the mic, go.
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's a challenging one, but I think the key part is to try and find systems that combine both digital and physical access systems, which obviously then clarifies the rules, makes it easier for the security management to understand what's going on. It's always going to be a challenge, but I think to get to that unified system, we need to just keep working on unified systems that work for both digital and physical access.
Yeah, I can answer. So I think one of the main conflicts is, so first the shareholders are changing towards IT. So we previously had to deal with security providers, security managers, and now the other stakeholders as IT department have to be definitely involved because they actually employ the identity systems mostly. One of the biggest hurdles at the moment with the companies is that access control systems do also have their identities, and their identity management is segregated and managed in an access control system itself. It's not really decoupled from credential management. In a classical framework, you separately have the identity management system, credential management system, and access management systems. So Americans did it really well with FICAM framework, Federal Identity Access and Credential Management. And this is basically the governing framework of federation that Lee, I think, was referring to with Lion and Monkey in your post in LinkedIn. So the best way to start is to segregate these three definitions. What is my identity? Where this data is stored? How I manage it? What are my credentials? How do people identify themselves to access something digital or something physical? It is both. You need your identity, and credential is your proof, your username or password, something you have, something you know, something you are, if it's a biometry. And thirdly, how do I reconcile the existing legacy access control systems to accept external credentials and identities? So what kind of middleware I have to employ, or what are the means to doing that?
So yeah, from our side, really, it's about the collaboration piece as well between the disparate teams that can sometimes reside in a business. So getting the right buy-in from workplace, from IT, from security, and really sort of leveraging the technology that's available to really sort of drive business outcomes from that. So if you take the IT space, they're very familiar with managing identity across the business already. So how can we leverage the systems that are already in place but also leverage their expertise and skills to upskill the security teams as well that maybe aren't so familiar or fluent with the IT space. So I think there's a massive learning curve that we're on at the moment in the traditional security piece, and it's how we can leverage technology but also our IT colleagues to bring the level up, but also enable us to manage identities effectively across the business.
Agreed there. So it's basically the gap that need to build between the security teams and the IT teams. There's a big gap, and this is where the governance need is especially needed, right? So we have a lot of standards like ISO standards, GDPR, and all basically towards cybersecurity, where you control the identity, the data of the user, and how you're going to protect against any threats. While the security systems, the physical systems, are just there, and they have their own standards, which has been in the industry for long. So how we are going to combine that? So one is what Ivan mentioned, in US it's a different system, and they have their own governance bodies that's working well. And in Europe, we are coming up with NIS2, which is the next one after GDPR, which is going to target both physical and cybersecurity, converge that, and companies have starting to adapt it, right? So the quicker the industry is going to adapt to it, then we have a standard system within Europe, and with GDPR already in place, it would play a pivotal role to standardize the security industry as a whole, and wouldn't be any difference between a physical identity or a cyber identity threats.
I just want to add one short comment. I was just thinking about NIS2, but basically it's too vague, this directive. So it really, if you read it as a customer, you cannot really discern anything of that. So what do I do with my identity and access? Yeah, that's a problem. So everyone has to really, so you have to be in the organizational context, as this gentleman said. So you really have to ask, what do you want to achieve as an organization? Who are your stakeholders, and what are your business goals? So I think now really going to NIS2 will just overcomplexify the things. So I would wish we would have FICAM as well here in Europe, but we are not so big, building so big enterprises still. But let's see.
It's interesting to me that I asked this same question and do it in the North American marketplace, and they talk about interoperability and APIs. I come here, ask the same question, and it's about regulations and standards and frameworks. It's which seems to be on par with a lot of the things that are going on. So yeah. All right. So if we talk about now that the access control identities and the data are in identity profiles are now coming into the identity systems that are there, in light of GDPR's purpose for limiting and data minimization principles, how are leading organizations in Europe addressing the complex privacy implications that arise now when we take these things that, frankly, if we think about it again, most systems that exist today weren't in access control, were not built with this in mind. So now we're taking basically identity data and where people are going and where people have come, bringing them into IT systems and have to, work within GDPR. How should we approach this?
I think it's quite interesting what cloud actually brings to the table in that respect. So if you look at where many sort of traditional access control servers reside, it's keeping someone's feet warm under a desk or in a server cupboard, 9 times out of 10. So data sovereignty is obviously a big part of that, and then where data's actually being collected and stored. So I think the cloud is a huge enabler for that in terms of being able to leverage availability zones using someone like an AWS. If it's for the German market, you can actually hold the information in country within their own compliance and their own GDPR policies and rules. Likewise, France, into the UK. So again, I think it's leveraging that tech layer that then really sort of then enables customers to drive that whole sort of compliance piece locally for them.
Yeah, from an IT perspective, it's all about the cloud nowadays, right? So everything is managed in the cloud, everything is in the cloud, and predominantly the cloud was initially set up in the US, right? So for that market, that's where the big tech companies are there, and that's where they have set up everything. And then when GDPR came in, they agreed to have a copy or instance of that cloud within the region here for Europe. And even now, there's a lot of companies where they're not understanding the whole cybersecurity and letting the usage of cloud, which is not local. So now with all the standards coming in, the threats, people are realizing in the industry that the cloud can hold the data, but it cannot leave the region. So with set GDPR rules already in place and people following it, these big tech companies are forced to have their own setup and cloud within the region and hold the data of the consumers here in the region, which is then being compliant, and which is already has a set process where people are agreeing to it, and that's what the industry has to push forward.
Yeah, I think Tony's absolutely right that you should be leveraging the tech systems, but it's also a very, very simple point of just remaining diligent as well. So I already spoke about this with our biometric data that we store it locally on the device, not into the cloud, because obviously that brings unnecessary risk. But if you're staying diligent and you're hiding personal data and only keeping that data for as long as you need to on your systems, you can then stay within line of GDPR and keep the public trust.
I will slightly add to that another perspective. So basically, it's not about cloud, it's about the system design, how we really design systems to expose the data. Typically, if you have an identity, it has a lot of attributes. So if we are talking about the person, it has a first name, last name, color of eyes, date of birth. So many data that is sensitive to us to identify ourselves. But as well, we have the data as which company we are working, at which department, what kind of telephone number they have as a private, as at home or at work. We have to design the systems in the way that we expose only the data that should be leveraged for this use case. Let's talk about, for example, gambling. So gambling is only interested about are you above 18 or you're not. You just need yes or no. You don't need this first name and last name. So if you are talking about the access or the corporate badge, so you just want to understand, so basically the authority. So I can enter this building, says who? Basically, says this company, because I work there. So that's the principle, the key principle. It can run on-prem and can run in the cloud. Of course, in the cloud, it's just easier to connect systems. That's true, but it's not the paramount just to move the industry. That's how I see also the advance of European identity. It will be the cloud, but also with the correct data design, while exposing only the attributes the servers or the company needs. That is the paradigm that should shift, and it is shifting. And it's really being driven from this region, from Europe.
But if I hear you on that, so I think a couple things. When I think about multinational organizations, so it starts to get into the verticalization of these different things where I need to have seamless across, right? So it makes me believe there's an aspect of cloud that needs to be also maybe hybrid on that end. But then also you just made a case, if I'm not mistaken, for realistically decentralized identities and self-sovereign identities, correct? Which is interesting to me because we talk about that as though it's like the far future and, voodoo magic of the identity space. But the more and more conversations that we have, the more and more it seems like we're getting closer to where that actually is an application. It gets lost in the conversations around Web3 and blockchain and things like that are somewhat polarizing for some people. But when we start hearing things like this, it starts to smell. It's like the old thing. If it quacks like a duck and it's probably a duck, it feels like that's what we're doing on self-sovereign identity. Any questions before I jump into the third one, by any chance? Just want to open it up. All right, good. You're answering all of them, so that's good. All right, so next up, with the increasing convergence of physical and digital identity systems, what specific integration challenges or technical limitations still prevent many organizations from achieving a truly seamless, credential-agnostic experience across their entire security ecosystem? Notice I didn't say just access control, okay? So what's getting in the way of truly seamless credential-agnostic experiences?
So, from my experience, it's really around sort of the huge legacy we have as a security business. A lot of the systems is almost fit and forget, and we're almost victims of our own success when it comes to reliability of systems as well. It's not unfamiliar to unlock a cabinet and see a panel that's 17 years old on the wall. It's not cyber compliant, it's not modern, it's not able to sort of do what a modern system needs. And I think if we sort of take away the security platform, it's really a business system. So again, it's about business systems integrations and really sort of understanding how the business wants to deploy systems in a modern environment, removing the legacy, or if it's not possible, how we bridge that legacy with middleware, APIs, and integrations to automate a lot of the information share between business systems and the physical security systems that we see on site today.
So I will slightly add to that. I completely agree with the gentleman. So legacy, yes. But in part of this legacy, the solution providers were very closed through the time. And to make just an integration to open an interface, you cannot just access any access control software. You have to be a partner of them. You have to undergo the specific certification process just to get their data, so very simple data in on-prem. So it makes the process very, very slow and cumbersome. And otherwise, this legacy design, where identities are managed inside the access control systems, where they mostly are. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think upgrading from legacy systems to newer systems is obviously going to be the solution for in most cases. But as you said, when you're stuck behind walls of accreditation, credentials, things like that, it does become slow and cumbersome. And I think that probably is going to be the main challenge of just trying to get everybody, not just in this country but in Europe, on the same page of where we're trying to be with these systems, so that more systems will be able to take their legacy systems, move it forward to something that actually has a more wholesome solution for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, to add on to that, basically the elephant in the room in this case is the cost, right? So you're upgrading a system, you're talking about upgrading a system or optimizing a system or making a system to a newer version. It involves cost, and the cost is not a single product, single entity that defines this, because this cost is not for just one system involved in the whole ecosystem, just not the access control system. There are multiple things involved in the ecosystem and everything needs to be updated accordingly. And moreover, we don't have a unified standard across the industry. We have different protocols, different standards, and we are still working towards that unification of one standard, which could then allow everybody to move at the same pace, grow at the same pace, bring in new systems, and adapt to the new technology that's coming in. So that's what we'll have to go towards to, and add on to that, then the cost will be reducing with one system, one technology, everybody are building towards it, then we will see a change.
I agree with that. I'm going to make a statement, and I'd love to get your feedback on it. My opinion on it, and part of my presentation I gave yesterday was, I think when where our value as an industry has been, which is, again, if you think about it, the value of keeping bad people out, lock and unlock, the security side of the video being what I would call it, an identify and respond later type of a thing on that end. There's a shift happening in as our systems become more enterprise software oriented. There's an expectation at the end user side that our systems work a certain way. When it was just about the locking and unlocking and those systems that were closed because we utilized that architecture as a statement of being better security, I didn't want to open up the plane of attack and things like that. So I made it very difficult for people to get access to that stuff, which in my opinion was hand waving to the fact that we just didn't build the systems originally to go do those types of things, so we didn't. But now as the expectations from customers are driving that systems act more like enterprise software, and with that is the idea of extensibility of APIs. I also think incentives that a lot of the organizations are set up to where before there was control like around identity, who was on that card, right? It was like, well, that's where the value creation was. As it shifts to other people like Apple and Google and some other places, and we lose control of that, our value then is what our system can do in addition to the locking and unlocking. So at that point, I began to be more interested in different partnerships that before I couldn't do because you were competitive, or my systems wouldn't be architected because if I did, I gave away the value, and I'm not going to do that. Now, those things are starting to shift slowly but slowly, and we get to a point where that becomes more the mainstream, and the traditional way that we've been doing things is more of the cottage. Agree, disagree?
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
I'll take it. I appreciate it. All right, good. I'm done. No.
Disagree, yeah. Oh, as always. Yeah, so basically, Apple provides you a credential. Yeah, that's of course a manageable and generally accepted and nice marketable credential, but it's still a credential. you need so identity. You still have to solve this problem, irrespective from Apple. That's what that is a driver to really adopt. So with this I agree, but people always overestimate it. So as a market driver, the main idea is the correct design for the customer. So really to solve his problem. The customer's problem is not to deploy fancy credentials, but to have the seamless authentication and to spend less time for security management. So that's what we need to attend. And this is just a nice vehicle to really engage in the conversations. That's I find what Apple really did nicely. Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think we undervalue, though, the fact that and we talk about it as like the first luxury good that we've had in our industry, that people start to care and ask questions around it and drive it. Who owns it in the end and how it gets deployed and the rest of it, I still think we're working through that. But no, I wouldn't disagree with you on that. Any questions from the crowd? All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Great conversation that I will continue having. All right.